Welcome to A Slice of SEL, a podcast for educators about social emotional learning.
Welcome to A Slice of SEL. This is a podcast from the St. Croix River Education District, where we're giving a slow drip of information with our member districts. Rye, could you please tell us where the podcast is available?
Absolutely. We are available on your favorite podcast apps as well as YouTube. So for your audio listeners, we'll describe what we're showing to the YouTube audience.
We are the SEL services team at the St. Croix River Education District. I'm Courtney.
I'm Rye.
And I'm Nick. And this week, we're going to begin a series of episodes that we're all really excited about. We're going to be talking about self-care for educators. And we're calling it a series. We don't really know when we're going to stop. It's not like a quick two-parter. We're probably going to be on this topic for a while because given the state of the state with COVID, this is a very relevant topic, something we all need. It's a little bit intimidating because there's so much that you can say about educator self-care and so many places to start. So we're just going to try and do our honest best to give you what you need right now. We're not going to try and fit it into one episode. Like I said, we're going to be on the topic for a while. One thing we talked about in our planning is we're really going to try and not point you in a million different directions, like, hey, go read this book or go listen to this other podcast episode for this other podcast. That's the last thing people need right now is being sent leapfrogging around the internet. So we're going to try and keep everything in-house and point you to really only resources that we have on our SEL website, like we typically do in the podcast. We're going to start this week by talking about how stress works and validating kind of if you're feeling like, hey, I'm drowning right now. I've been drowning for months last spring and since school started this year. We're validating that and talking about why that's happening. And that's kind of a rationale for self-care in general. Like self-care can't be a Band-Aid. It's helping us respond to a really big issue. And we hope you leave this episode mostly just feeling seen and understood for what you're going through right now.
Before we get into that, let's check in about what's filling our buckets today. So for me, it's watching The Queen's Gambit. It's such an interesting show on Netflix. I have to be honest, I finished it like within 2 days of starting it. It's about a teenage chess prodigy and it's super good. What about you, Rye?
Oh, for me, so Courtney and I are involved in a regional communities of practice, and one of our leaders shared a video of gratitude today going around on YouTube. It's children's choir singing about how the adults in their life and on the front lines and the heroes of COVID-19 are just doing a good job. So just thanking them. And it came at a really good time because I was balancing, being a mom, working from home, being in education just in general. And it was just like these beautiful children singing like, hey, you're doing a good job. And we noticed it. So it really filled my bucket and came at a good time to this week.
Oh, that's awesome. I haven't watched that video yet, but I want to, and I really want to watch The Queen's Gambit. There's like 7 episodes. You burned through that.
Oh, well, it doesn't take me long. I have a problem when it comes to good TV.
What's filling my bucket is on Scred's social media accounts. So on like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we started this series called #ScredSays, and it's like positive gossip. So we have people writing in and submitting things that they've noticed in our member districts that are awesome. So it's like teams and people and whole schools doing awesome work. And I get to read some of it as it's being posted. It's just awesome. It's just really cool to see this like steady stream of shout outs to people doing amazing work in like really difficult, challenging times. So that's really filling my bucket on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. So like I said, we're gonna get into our episode now. We're gonna talk first about how stress works. And that's a rationale for why we do self-care, why it's not selfish to do self-care, and why self-care is about things we do every day, little choices we make, habits that we build, not a Band-Aid and not a quick fix. We're also going to talk about the wellness wheel, and we'll get into that later, but that's kind of a way to look at your own self-care practices. So let's talk about stress, guys. Usually when I talk to someone about stress, one of the first things I say is like, it's a mix of hormones, that get released into your body. Those hormones are cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
I think you did. It sounded great.
Thank you. But it's like a cocktail of hormones, and they get released into your body really, really quickly in microseconds. When I'm talking to little kids about this, I usually call it a potion, and I say like, it's like a stress potion. It's like someone poured this whole potion onto your brain and it just started to work really differently, and that's okay. What those chemicals do is they change how the body and the brain work, and the more of that stress potion that's in our bodies and our brains, the more that happens. And just some of the things that happen when you've got cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine surging through your body, your muscles tighten up, and think about all of your muscles. So you might get headaches, just like stress headaches, because the muscles in your head tighten up. Muscle aches around your whole body. Your stomach can start to ache because your body starts to shut down your digestion really quickly, and it's not ready for that. Your breathing shortens and you feel like shortness of breath. It gets harder to be articulate. If you've ever been in an argument with your significant other, for example, and you're starting to get stressed, it becomes a lot harder to explain yourself the way you would want to if you were calm. And it's harder to make good choices because you're processing, your decision-making part of your brain gets less resources. And another thing we usually mention when we're describing stress to students is it's more than an emotion. So we use this phrase like, oh, I'm so stressed right now. And we use that the same way we'd say like, I'm so frustrated. But really, like, stress is bigger than the word frustrated or anxious. It's more like a spectrum that other emotion words are kind of resting on. So like fear, anger, frustration, anxiety, feeling nervous, rage, all of those are emotions that we feel. But whenever we're feeling any of those, we're just feeling different amounts of stress. Like the same hormone cocktail that I talked about, that stress potion, it's underneath all of those different kinds of emotions. And we usually say, because we're talking about a spectrum, I was talking to a teacher at North Branch Area Middle School, and she called it like a stress-o-meter, and it goes from like calm to like totally out of control, a stress-o-meter. So yeah, calm is part of that too. We've always got a little bit of adrenaline and cortisol and all of that in us, and we really need to. I think one of my professors said like, hey, we need all of that, otherwise our bodies would be so relaxed, we would just die, because like we need that in us. So, even when we're feeling calm, those chemicals are still there. It's just when we have too much, that's not good for us.
It's all about that balance.
All about that balance. When we have too much of those stress hormones, it usually comes in two kinds of speeds, I guess you could call it. One we call acute stress, and the other we call chronic stress. And depending on the age of students we're talking to, sometimes we call these like slow versus steady, sudden versus steady, I think is what I was saying, and like fast versus slow. But acute versus chronic is the like medical term. And acute, another word we use for acute stress, is fight, flight, or freeze. You've probably heard that before if you've worked in education for a couple of years. You might call it like fight or flight reaction. Basically, the idea is the surge of cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine, that stress cocktail, comes at you really fast. And one thing we usually get into with kids when we're talking about this is like, hey, like thousands of years ago, humans were running around the plains of Africa getting chased by lions and tigers, and we needed to have that sudden surge of this stress potion so that our body would be ready to run away or to fight the tiger. Don't fight a tiger, you're gonna lose. But we needed that. And now, generally speaking, when we're in heavy traffic or when we get in trouble with a teacher or with our parent, our lives aren't in danger in that same way, but our body is still kind of set up and programmed to work the same way. So we're gonna have this big reaction sometimes to things that don't really justify having that big reaction. And we have to learn how to respond to it and manage it. So that's acute stress. Chronic stress is, again, kind of that steady, like we just have too much all the time or most of the time. And if you think about like someone who has a really high stress job, like a teacher, for example, or an air traffic controller, or a manager of a team, kind of like a really high stress job. If you have that for decades, we have this stereotype of like, yeah, he worked at that firm for 40 years, stressed every day, drank all those sodas, really, really keyed up all the time, and then had a heart attack. Like that's kind of the stereotype of like that chronic stress pattern, just having too much stress for a really long period of time. And it's really tough, like hypertension, heart problems are associated with that. And part of the reason is cortisol, one of those three that I keep mentioning. Cortisol, it's almost like poison for your body because it changes how your brain and your body work. But if you have too much of it all the time, if you think about like your body taking its resources and getting ready to fight or run away, and if your body's like that all the time, that's just not good for your overall health. And unfortunately, there's this cycle where if I have too much cortisol, if I have chronic stress and I'm stressed too much, pretty much all the time or most of the day, it becomes easier for my body to get triggered. So smaller and smaller things are going to produce bigger and bigger releases of cortisol for me. And it's this perpetual cycle, and it becomes easier to get stressed out. And one thing that, this is related to in schools is we talk about trauma. Kids in our schools have adverse childhood experiences, is a phrase we use for trauma that kids have experienced. So traumatic events. And the more of these adverse childhood experiences that someone has, the more likely they are to have adverse health outcomes. So, and shorter lifespan. So there's mortality implications to having stress and having chronic stress and too much of this cortisol. Again, this kind of hormone that is good for us in short little bursts, but really not good for us if we have too much of it in our system at all times.
And when we're talking about being teachers, we do experience both types of stress. I think when I think of the acute stress, it's something like, you're up for an observation and you have the principal coming to sit in your room. And then of course that one student just has to have that behavior today, right? That would be acute. Or you're dealing with a crisis situation for one of your students, that would be acute stress. But chronic stress is also a huge concern for us as educators. It's like it has been a big deal, but now we're mid-marathon in this COVID-19 pandemic. In the spring, it felt like it was maybe going to be over, but now we're still in it. So we've been stressed out for, I don't know, what is it, 10 months now, 9 months, like straight.
Somewhere in that
So
ballpark.
it's been a long time. So teachers are just dealing with a lot right now. Educator chronic stress and burnout was a big deal, like I said before this, but it has been even made more of a big deal since this pandemic, COVID-19 has started. We have just a problematic culture in education where busy is normal. And so teachers are expected to like martyr themselves to help our children be successful. If you're not busy, if you're not working on your prep, if you're not taking kids in when they don't have a place to go or doing the extra little bit, joining all of those committees and stuff, like you're just not looked at as doing your job. So that's a problem.
Yeah, and it's almost, like a badge of honor. Like I have to show people that I'm being busy. Otherwise, it's like I'm not committed to my job or not successful. Like that, we talk all the time, like busyness is, just problematic part of our culture. And I really don't like that idea. That martyrdom word comes up all the time when I'm talking to colleagues about just the way that we talk about education and the way that we do our jobs. And one thing personally I'm super passionate about is just trying to take some of the burden off people, trying to like look at the work we do day to day and simplify it, or like make resources. Like we've worked as a team of 3 on like an IEP writing goal resource just to help teachers do that easier and more quickly. That kind of stuff we're super passionate about because we shouldn't be expected to just get the job done at all costs.
Right. Exactly.
So we talked a little bit about stress. That's just kind of an explanation we put out there to again, kind of validate, like, it makes sense. If you're feeling like I'm drowning, that makes complete sense, because you've probably had more cortisol and adrenaline running through you at like a resting chronic level in the last 6 months than maybe ever before, because we're all going through this huge traumatic event that is really difficult to navigate, and it's been going on for a long time. So that makes sense. So what do we do about it is what we're going to try and spend our time on in this episode, and then in the weeks ahead as we do other episodes about self-care. We again weren't sure exactly where to start with this, but we're going to start with the wellness wheel. And we're going to get into what that is, but it's basically taking the idea of well-being and splitting it into categories, or buckets, as I like to say, the different areas of your life and the different areas where you can feel like, yeah, I feel pretty good about, my social life, or that is an area where I don't feel well at all, for example. And the reason why we're going to start here is because when we talk about managing stress in schools and like calming strategies, we tend to have this perception that it's all about like deep breathing or pacing when we get too upset, or like counting to 10. And those things are all really important, and we probably will talk about them more. But I like to say it's basically like the emergency brakes on your car. And if you are cruising along and you're about to get in a collision, like you maybe use that emergency brake, you got to brake really fast. So those tools like that are important. But really, if that's your constant pattern, and some of the students we've worked with, this is certainly kind of the pattern we see, like everything is spiking that stress and making it so that we got to use that emergency brake. That's not a sustainable way to get through your day. Like at a certain point, that brake's not going to work anymore. It's going to wear out, or it's just going to be super hard to use it. So like your setup and you're being proactive, the things that you do, like getting more sleep, for example, make it a lot less likely you're going to have to use those emergency brakes all the time, to constantly being, controlling your impulses. So without further ado, we're going to talk more about that wellness wheel. And this is something that we are going to link into the show notes. We've got a couple different varieties because, like I said, it's about breaking up the idea of well-being into categories. And some people end up with 6, some people end up with 8. So we gave you a couple different versions that you might want to look through and pick your favorite. But it's a wheel. So there's a circle and it has different quadrants. And we're going to start with social wellness. Rai, could you tell us about that?
So social wellness just means that we have meaningful relationships and interactions with others. A good conversation with a good friend that you trust is way greater than a bunch of likes on Instagram and Facebook. So these days, we know the importance and the effects that social media has on our relationships, but just bringing it back to those actual interactions with the people in our lives. This also helps us feel that we are just part of a greater community and that we're not alone, and especially in this state right now. So making sure that we are reaching out to others and having real relationships.
And I think, isn't this one of the first things that came up when we were back in March 2020 and everyone was suddenly trapped at home? And I think one of the first things we went to was Zoom. That was the blow up of like, hey, we got to have some video meetings because we got to socialize. Mm-hmm. That was like really hard on everyone. And that's when we thought like that maybe this will be over in like a month or so. But yeah, I like what you said about social media, right?
Here we go.
I think one of the stereotypes is people thinking like, oh, that person's a social butterfly. Like they're so social, they must be so happy. But like someone can be around people all day and still feel really lonely. So like the quality of the social time you're spending with people is really important, I think, to being well in that area.
Absolutely. The next area we're going to talk about is that physical wellness. So physical wellness is just taking care of our bodies, making sure we're getting that physical activity that our bodies need. I know when the pandemic first started, I was really committed to going out for a walk every day. I was crushing it, but that was right when it was turning into spring. So it was getting better weather every day. Now that is definitely cut back because the icky weather we have outside lately. We also need to think about our nutrition. So making sure we're eating all of those healthy foods and having some balance, right? We can't just be eating the big Cheetos. We have to be having some vegetables, but making sure we're eating what we enjoy too. And then also making sure we're getting the sleep that our bodies need. I know that I struggle with getting enough sleep, but I do notice when I'm able to get the sleep that I need, I just feel like I can function so much better, and I just feel better all around the next day.
Yeah, and we talk about this with students all the time because again, like we want to focus on that break system, but if you have had like 3 hours of sleep, like some of my students have in the past for days, like weeks on end, I think, like that's not setting yourself up for success at all. Like you're gonna
Right.
you're gonna be a super big grumpy pants if that's kind of what your sleep schedule is.
Mhm.
Especially if you, to get through that, then you're kind of drinking energy drinks and all these things that will spike your blood sugar and kind of like rapidly cycle you up and down. Like that's just, you're going to be grumpy pants.
Mhm.
Emotional wellness is being a part of it is being aware of your emotions. So part of the reason when I was talking about stress earlier, I was just thinking like in the last couple of days, I've had all these tasks fall on me. And I think that's familiar to everyone. Like, oh, I leave a meeting and suddenly I've got this big to-do list. Or our learning model changed and I have to plan around a curriculum for a whole new schedule and all this change. Suddenly you have this stress in your body and this tension, and you don't stop to think about like, oh my gosh, like I'm just like on high alert and I'm super keyed up right now. What am I feeling? So we use this phrase like name it to tame it. And that's been one of I have a couple self-care goals for this year. And one is to just name it more often. So there are a lot of great apps out there, but I'm going to shout out the Mood Meter app from Yale University. I love it because it's just so simple. There are a lot of mental health apps that are pretty complicated and have a lot of features, but the Mood Meter one, you just open it up and you check in and it helps you pinpoint what emotion word you're feeling. And then it just asks if you want to stay there or if you want to shift. And if you say, I want to shift, like if I'm anxious and I want to shift, it'll give me like a quick 1-sentence idea of what to do. So shout out there. Because it's about, again, kind of that awareness of your emotions and then your ability to cope and respond to those in a healthy way. And we're going to talk more about that kind of stuff in the next couple episodes. I think we're going to focus pretty heavily on emotional wellness. Occupational wellness is your ability or your capacity to feel like you're using your talents, you're doing what you want to do. You feel like you're making a difference in the lives of other people and you're contributing to society in a greater way. So I know one thing I try and do to increase my occupational wellness is gravitate toward tasks and roles that use my talents. One thing we talk about in education, I think a lot is like this idea that I've been super busy and have done so much stuff this day or this week, but I didn't feel like I did any of it well. I've talked to teachers many times about that feeling, like I didn't do anything this week to the point that I could do it if I had enough time to do it. So this is easier said than done, but we talk about like setting boundaries, setting limits, saying no to things, like making choices and not focusing so much on making sure I'm busy all the time, trying to like focus in as much as you can, and find the things that fulfill you in your job and that you really enjoy doing.
The next one is spiritual wellness. Now, this doesn't always have to have a religious focus, but it just is a focus on feeling and doing things that make you feel like you are part of the common good. It also helps you feel like your life has a purpose and that you're living a life that has values as the main compass and drive your choices.
Intellectual wellness, or finding things that tap into our curiosity and then trying to learn more about those things. So one thing that I did this summer that I didn't realize I was going to like fall in love with was starting to redo furniture. So I have like 3 more projects in my garage that I'm really excited to start. And I didn't realize it was going to be so good and they were going to turn out so well, but it really just made me feel like I found a new skill and a hobby that I really enjoy. We need to find opportunities to be creative and engage in that critical thinking. Sometimes all we want to do is tune out with those social media apps or TV, any other type of thing like that. But time can be less fulfilling than spending it doing something you're truly interested in or with people you're truly interested in being with.
And Courtney, your furniture stuff is amazing.
Oh, thank you. I should start selling it.
I like that last thing you said about the tuning out, because I think all of this is about balance. Because I remember very distinctly there was this presentation I went to where we were talking at tables about well-being and self-care, and one of the people was brave enough to say, like, yeah, my favorite self-care strategy is just finding 10 minutes to sit with my smartphone on the couch when the kids are busy and just tuning out, or watching like Selling Sunset or some other reality TV show, just like tuning out a little bit. And I think like there's a lot of value to that. Like I do that all the time. Part of the reason why I'm watching The Golden Girls right now is like, it's just kind of repetitive and really sweet and nice. And I just like, that it's not super stimulating the way like an intense drama show would be. So we all need that. But I think there's also some value. Like I've been sitting there browsing social media or Reddit or something for way too long. And I'm like, I'm not really enjoying myself. I'm kind of going through the motions here, like kind of bored actually. And I'd probably be having a more fulfilled day if I was doing something a little bit more intellectually active. So it's just kind of being reflective on your habits.
I've noticed that in my kids too, and along with students, like my children here at home with me would much rather just be in their phones and on social media and reality shows and all the things. But if we take a break and, turn the tech off, and she's doing things that, that she's interested in, like dance and her makeup and her things, and just creating things, she's much more happier. And I mean, it's just way more evident just from a parent standpoint and as an educator too. So making sure that our kids and our students are fulfilling their intellectual wellness as well is important.
Yeah, totally true. Financial wellness is the last area we're going to talk about. And living within your means is a phrase that I saw on some of the wellness wheel kind of assessments for this, because everyone's means are different. I think it's just, living within your means is a good phrase, and setting aside a safety net. And this is a really important area of wellness, because we just know poverty is one of the biggest factors leading to chronic stress. When you're in that mindset of like never feeling settled, never taking anything for granted, having no safety net, that's a constant source of stress. You dream about it. I just remember I've been very fortunate enough to, I don't think ever feel that pressure. Probably the closest I've been is in grad school when I was living on the East Coast, and I had had to budget very, very carefully for everything. And just like that, there was no safety net. And I was living thousands of miles away from my parents for the first time. And that was extremely stressful. And I remember the first time I got my licensed educator paycheck and just felt a little bit of that stress go away. So that it's just a huge, huge effect that your financial wellness can have on your day-to-day stress level. All right, guys, we're gonna switch to some takeaways and wind things down here. But like I said, this isn't going to be the end of our conversations about self-care. We're just getting started. But just to recap, we talked about how stress works, and it just makes total sense. I've heard this phrase 100 times in the last couple of weeks. Like, I feel like I'm drowning, and that makes complete sense because we have no routines. The second we get a routine set, it's like everything gets upended. So when we've been in that for months now, we're all feeling chronic stress. It's like your body and your brain are keyed up all the time, or for big chunks of the day. Like I said, we're just going to try and do our part to educate about what self-care is, give ideas about how we can do it. And like we talked about, it's more than a Band-Aid. It's more than like a quick fix or a little in the moment tool. Like we talked about the wellness wheel and all those areas, because it's pretty much everything that we do. We can make small choices and establish small habits that help us take care of ourselves better.
But for today, thanks for spending time with us. Make sure to subscribe if you're listening on the podcast. And if you're on YouTube, click the bell so that you're notified when new episodes are released each week. And we'll see you next time when you come back for another slice of SEL.
Thanks, guys. Bye.